The sun hung low over the barren mountains of Afghanistan, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Lieutenant Marcus Chen squinted through his binoculars, scanning the village below. His team of Navy SEALs had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks, and intelligence suggested the terrorist leader was hiding in this remote settlement. The mission seemed straightforward on paper, but Marcus knew better than to trust easy predictions in this unforgiving land. Behind him, 7 elite operators checked their weapons and adjusted their gear. Each man was a veteran of countless operations, their faces weathered by sun and experience. They moved with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and combat. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team's second-in-command, approached Marcus with a tactical map spread across his forearm. The village consisted of about 40 mud brick compounds clustered around a central marketplace. Their target was believed to be in the largest structure on the eastern edge. What Marcus didn't know was that accompanying them on this mission was someone who would soon become the difference between life and death. Sergeant Emily Rodriguez sat 20 meters away, her sniper rifle disassembled and carefully packed in her gear. She had been attached to the team only 2 days earlier, much to the surprise of some of the operators. Female snipers were still relatively rare in special operations, and this was her first mission with this particular SEAL team. Some of the men had exchanged skeptical glances when she arrived, but Emily was used to that. She had spent 5 years proving herself, first in the Marine Corps and then in specialized sniper training, where she had outscored 90% of her male counterparts. Emily's journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Growing up in a small Texas town, she had learned to shoot at age 7 when her grandfather taught her to hunt deer in the hill country. By 14, she could hit a target at 600 yards with her grandfather's old rifle. When she turned 18, she enlisted despite her family's concerns. Her father, a former Army sergeant, had worried about his daughter entering combat zones, but Emily possessed a determination that couldn't be swayed. Through basic training, advanced infantry school, and eventually scout sniper training, she had faced doubts and discrimination. Male instructors questioned whether she had the physical strength. Fellow trainees wondered if she could handle the mental pressure. Emily answered every doubt with performance, becoming one of the top graduates in her sniper class. Now, sitting on this Afghan mountainside, she methodically cleaned her rifle scope with a soft cloth. Her weapon was a customized M110 semi-automatic sniper system, capable of accurate fire up to 800 meters. She had named it Whisper because of how quietly it ended threats. Emily noticed a few of the SEALs watching her, probably still uncertain about having a woman on their mission. She didn't blame them. Trust had to be earned, especially in combat. She simply continued her preparations, checking every component of her equipment with meticulous care. Marcus called the team together as darkness approached. They would move into position after midnight, using night vision to navigate the treacherous mountain paths. The plan was to establish overwatch positions on the ridgeline above the village, while an assault element moved in to capture or eliminate the target. Emily would be positioned on the highest point, providing cover for the entire operation. Marcus looked at her directly when explaining this, his expression neutral but professional. He told her that her role was critical and that the lives of his men would depend on her accuracy and judgment. Emily nodded, meeting his gaze without flinching. She understood the weight of responsibility. Every sniper did. One missed shot could mean a teammate's death. One bad decision could compromise an entire mission. She had spent thousands of hours training for exactly this kind of operation, but training and reality were different things. As the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, she felt the familiar mix of nervousness and focus that came before action. The team began their movement at 0200 hours. They traveled in single file, maintaining tactical spacing as they navigated the rocky slopes. Emily carried approximately 60 pounds of gear, including her rifle, ammunition, water, and survival equipment. The terrain was brutal, with loose stones that threatened to send someone tumbling down the mountainside with every step. They moved in complete silence, communicating only through hand signals and the occasional whispered word into their radio headsets. After 3 hours of climbing, they reached their positions. Emily found her overwatch spot on a rocky outcrop that provided clear sightlines to the entire village below. She established her hide, arranging rocks and using camouflage netting to break up her silhouette. Through her night vision scope, The village appeared in shades of green, with heat signatures from cooking fires showing as bright spots. A few dogs wandered between buildings, and occasionally a villager would emerge to relieve themselves or check on livestock. Marcus and the assault team moved down toward the village, using the pre-dawn darkness as cover. Emily tracked their progress through her scope, watching for any signs of enemy activity. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. She had learned in her training that the most dangerous moments often came when things seemed calm. Her finger rested alongside her rifle's trigger guard, ready but disciplined. Patience was a sniper's greatest virtue. As the assault team reached the outskirts of the village, Emily noticed movement on a rooftop approximately 400 meters from her position. Through her scope, she could see a figure carrying what appeared to be an AK-47 rifle. The person moved from shadow to shadow, clearly trying to remain undetected. Emily keyed her radio microphone twice, the signal for possible hostile contact. Marcus's voice came back immediately, calm and professional, asking for details. Emily described the target's position and movement pattern, tracking the figure as it moved along the rooftop toward a position overlooking the main street where Marcus's team would soon be advancing. The mission had just become complicated. What was supposed to be a quick capture operation now showed signs of being something more. Emily steadied her breathing, her eye pressed to the scope. Her world narrowed to the view through that circular lens. The figure on the rooftop was now joined by another, then a third. They were setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun. Emily's heart rate increased slightly, but her hands remained steady. She reported the new development to Marcus, who ordered the team to hold position while they assessed the situation. Then, as dawn began to break over the mountains, everything changed. The village that had seemed nearly empty suddenly came alive with armed fighters emerging from buildings. The first shots came from everywhere at once. Marcus and his team found themselves caught in a carefully planned ambush, with enemy fighters appearing on rooftops, in doorways, and behind walls. The intelligence had been wrong, or worse, had been deliberately leaked to draw them into a trap. Bullets kicked up dust around the SEALs as they scrambled for cover behind a low stone wall. The team's radio man, Petty Officer Davis, immediately called for extraction and air support, but the nearest helicopter was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes might as well have been 40 hours when bullets were flying. Emily's world narrowed to the view through her scope. She could see the entire battlefield laid out below her like a deadly chessboard. Her training took over, and emotions fell away. There was no room for fear or doubt now, only calculation and execution. She identified the greatest threats first, prioritizing targets based on the danger they posed to the trapped SEALs. The machine gun team on the rooftop was her first concern. 3 men were frantically trying to set up the weapon, which could cut through the SEAL's cover in seconds once it started firing. She adjusted for wind, distance, and elevation. 420 meters, a slight breeze from the west. Target moving. Emily controlled her breathing, waiting for the precise moment between heartbeats when her body was most still. The crosshairs settled on the gunner as he bent to attach the ammunition belt. She squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and through her scope, Emily saw the gunner collapse. His companions froze for a moment, confused about where the shot had come from. Emily was already acquiring her next target. The loader reached for the machine gun, trying to complete the setup. Another breath, another perfect moment of stillness, another squeeze. The second man fell before he could fire a single round. Marcus heard the distinctive crack of Emily's rifle from the ridge above, and immediately understood what was happening. Their new sniper was already working to even the odds. He keyed his radio and called out targets, knowing that Emily could hear the entire team's communications. He told her about enemy fighters massing on the northern side of the compound, preparing to flank their position. Emily shifted her aim, scanning the area Marcus had indicated. She counted at least 8 hostiles moving through an alley, using the morning shadows for concealment. They carried a mix of AK-47s and RPGs, and they were moving with tactical discipline that suggested training and experience. The range was longer now, nearly 500 meters, and the targets were moving quickly. Emily knew she couldn't eliminate all of them before they reached firing positions, so she prioritized. She aimed for the fighters carrying the RPGs first. A rocket-propelled grenade could destroy the wall protecting the SEALs, or kill multiple men with a single shot. She tracked the lead RPG gunner as he jogged between buildings, The shot would have to be quick, a snapshot rather than a carefully aimed shot. She led the target slightly, accounting for his movement, and fired. The fighter stumbled and fell, the RPG clattering from his hands. His companions scattered, suddenly aware they were being hunted from an unseen position. Jake Morrison, the team's second in command, was pinned down behind a water trough with 2 other operators. Enemy fire was coming from at least 3 different directions, making it impossible to return effective fire without exposing themselves. A bullet struck the metal trough with a sharp ping, and another kicked up dirt inches from Jake's face. He heard Emily's rifle crack again from somewhere above and behind him, and one of the enemy shooters on a nearby rooftop jerked and disappeared from view. Then another shot and another hostile ceased firing. Jake realized that Emily was systematically working through the enemies that had them pinned, clearing them out one by one with methodical precision. The enemy fighters began to realize they were dealing with a sniper, and several started firing randomly toward the ridge where Emily was positioned. Bullets struck rocks around her position, sending stone chips flying. One round passed close enough that Emily heard its distinctive snap as it broke the sound barrier near her head. She didn't flinch. Snipers learned early in training to ignore near misses and focus entirely on their work. She identified the muzzle flashes from the fighters shooting at her and calmly engaged them. These shots were easier because the enemies were giving away their positions with every shot they fired. Within 30 seconds, 3 of them were down and the others stopped shooting in her direction. Marcus saw an opportunity. With Emily suppressing the enemies to their north and east, he could move his team to a better defensive position inside a more substantial compound. He gave the order, and the SEALs moved in pairs, one group providing covering fire while the other sprinted to new cover. Emily watched through her scope, ready to engage any enemy who tried to target the moving operators. A fighter appeared in a second-story window, rifle raised and aimed at the running SEALs. Emily's shot shattered the window and the threat together. Another hostile tried to lean around a corner to get a shot. Emily put her round through the edge of the wall, and the man fell backward out of sight. The team made it to the compound and quickly established a perimeter defense. They had better cover now with thick walls and multiple rooms to spread out in, but they were still surrounded and the enemy wasn't giving up. Marcus could hear voices shouting in Pashto, organizing another assault. He estimated they were facing at least 30 to 40 enemy fighters, far more than intelligence had suggested would be in the area. This wasn't just a group guarding a high-value target. This was a prepared defensive force that had been waiting for exactly this kind of raid. Emily reloaded her rifle with a fresh magazine, her movements automatic from years of practice. She had already fired 23 rounds, and each shot played back in her memory with perfect clarity. 23 shots, and she was confident in at least 18 confirmed hits. But there were still many more enemies out there, and her teammates were still trapped. She scanned the village methodically, sector by sector, looking for threats. Movement caught her eye near the village center. A group of fighters was positioning a recoilless rifle, a weapon capable of punching through the compound walls that protected the SEALs. The range was extreme, nearly 700 meters, and heat shimmer from the rising sun was beginning to distort her view. Emily adjusted her scope for the distance and took several deep breaths to steady herself. The target was stationary now, which helped, but the distance meant that even a slight error in calculation would result in a miss. She factored in wind speed, air temperature, elevation difference, even the rotation of the earth for a shot at this distance. Her instructors at sniper school had drilled these calculations into her until they became second nature. She settled the crosshairs on the gunner's center mass and took up the trigger's slack. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she watched through the scope as the gunner collapsed over the weapon. The other fighters around the recoilless rifle dove for cover, abandoning the weapon. Jake's voice came over the radio, slightly out of breath but steady. He told Emily that she was doing incredible work and to keep it up. Marcus added that extraction helicopters were inbound but still 25 minutes out. 25 minutes. Emily had never been particularly good at math in school, but she could calculate angles, distances, and wind speeds with computer-like accuracy. Now she was calculating something different: how many enemies she could eliminate in 25 minutes. The enemy changed tactics after losing so many fighters to Emily's precision fire. Instead of exposing themselves in open areas, they began using the narrow alleys and doorways of the village for cover. They moved in short rushes, making themselves harder targets. Emily adapted her strategy accordingly. She couldn't see into the shadowed alleys from her position, so she focused on the choke points where enemies would have to expose themselves to advance on the seal position. She was no longer hunting targets but controlling terrain, denying the enemy the ability to move freely. Marcus organized his team's defense inside the compound. They had found themselves in what appeared to be a wealthy resident's home, with several rooms arranged around a central courtyard. The thick walls provided good protection against small arms fire, but Marcus knew they wouldn't stop an RPG or the recoilless rifle if the enemy managed to get it working again. He positioned his men at windows and on the flat roof, creating overlapping fields of fire. Corporal Chen, the team's medic, was treating Petty Officer Rodriguez for a bullet graze across his shoulder. It wasn't serious, but it reminded them all how close the enemy fire was coming. Emily noticed a pattern in how the enemy fighters were moving. They seemed to be concentrating their forces on the western side of the compound, possibly preparing for a coordinated assault from that direction. She reported this observation to Marcus, who immediately reinforced his western defense. Sure enough, within minutes, a large group of enemy fighters emerged from buildings on that side, firing as they advanced. The SEALs returned fire with disciplined bursts, and Emily engaged targets as fast as she could acquire them. Her rifle was getting hot now from sustained firing, the barrel heating up enough that it could affect accuracy if she wasn't careful. She fired at a fighter who was sprinting across an open area. Hit. Another who paused to reload behind a low wall. Hit. A third who was trying to get into position to throw a grenade. Hit. The attack faltered, as the enemy realized they were being cut down before they could close the distance. The surviving fighters retreated back into the maze of buildings, leaving several bodies in the street. Emily's shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and her trigger finger was developing a blister, but she maintained her focus. Physical discomfort was just another thing to be ignored, like fear or doubt. Jake called out that they were low on ammunition. In the initial ambush and the subsequent firefight, the team had burned through a significant portion of their combat load. Marcus made the decision to conserve ammo, taking only carefully aimed shots at high-priority targets. This meant Emily's role became even more critical. She was their primary offensive weapon now, the only one who could reach out and strike the enemy at distance without wasting precious ammunition. She felt the weight of that responsibility, but didn't let it affect her shooting. Pressure was just another variable to account for, like wind or distance. The enemy tried a different approach. Several fighters appeared on rooftops scattered throughout the village all at once. They were trying to overwhelm Emily's ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously. It was a smart tactic, but Emily had trained for exactly this scenario. She prioritized based on threat level, engaging the enemies with the best firing angles on the SEAL position first. Her shots came in rapid succession now, the rifle's semi-automatic action allowing her to fire as fast as she could acquire targets. One fighter fell, then another, then a third. The others realized their mistake and scrambled back into cover. But not before Emily had eliminated 5 of them. Sergeant First Class Thompson, one of the SEAL team's most experienced operators, watched through his binoculars as Emily's bullets found their marks with uncanny accuracy. He had been skeptical when she first joined them, not because of her gender, but because she was untested in real combat with their team. Qualification scores at a range were one thing. Actual combat was entirely different. But Thompson was revising his opinion with every shot she fired. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was skill honed through countless hours of practice and blessed with natural talent. He keyed his radio and told Emily she was doing outstanding work, meaning every word. Emily heard the compliment but didn't respond, too focused on her next target. A fighter had appeared near the village well, trying to set up what looked like a heavy machine gun in a position that would have a direct line of sight to the compound entrance. She ranged the target at 540 meters, adjusted for a slight crosswind, and fired. The fighter dropped, and his companions who had been helping him set up the weapon fled. Emily was beginning to recognize individual fighters now, tracking them as they moved between buildings. One man in particular, wearing a distinctive red headscarf, seemed to be directing the enemy forces. He would appear briefly to give orders, then disappear back into cover before Emily could get a clear shot. Marcus received an update from the incoming extraction force. The helicopters were 15 minutes out, but there was a problem. The landing zone they had planned to use was now covered by enemy fire. The pilots would need the area cleared, or they would have to find an alternative location, which would mean the SEALs would have to move through hostile territory to reach it. Marcus studied his tactical map, looking for options. There was a flat area about 200 meters north of their current position that could work as an emergency landing zone, but reaching it would mean exposing his team to fire from multiple directions. Emily heard the discussion over the radio and immediately began scanning the route to the alternative landing zone. She identified several positions where enemy fighters could set up ambushes along the path the SEALs would have to take. She marked these danger areas in her mind, preparing to suppress them when the time came to move. Her ammunition supply was running low too. She had started the mission with 120 rounds and had already expended more than half. She would need to make every remaining shot count. There was no room for misses now, no margin for error. The man with the red headscarf appeared again, this time staying visible longer as he organized what looked like another coordinated assault. Emily tracked him through her scope, waiting for a clear shot. He moved behind a wall and she lost sight of him. She kept her crosshairs on the spot where he had disappeared, anticipating where he might reappear. Seconds passed, then he stepped out, gesturing to fighters on his left. Emily fired instantly. The man stumbled but didn't fall, disappearing back into cover. She had hit him, she was sure of it, but probably not fatally. Body armor maybe, or a grazing hit. Either way, the enemy's leadership was disrupted for the moment. The enemy launched another attack, this time from multiple directions simultaneously. They had learned that concentrated attacks were vulnerable to Emily's fire, so they were trying to spread out the assault to divide her attention. Fighters appeared on the eastern side, engaging the SEALs while another group attacked from the south. Marcus's team was returning fire from both directions, their ammunition situation becoming critical. Emily had to make rapid decisions about which targets to engage, knowing that every shot she took meant leaving another target unengaged. She chose enemies who were in the best positions to inflict casualties, firing so quickly that the individual shots almost blurred together into a continuous stream of action. The compound wall exploded inward as an RPG finally found its mark. The blast knocked 2 SEALs off their feet and filled the courtyard with dust and debris. Marcus shook off the effects of the concussion and immediately checked on his men. Both were alive but dazed, their ears ringing from the explosion. A second RPG streaked through the air but missed high, exploding against the compound's roof and showering everyone with broken tiles and dirt. The enemy was getting the range now, and the next shot might be the one that caused real casualties. Emily saw the RPG gunner reloading in an alley 300 meters away. He was partially concealed behind a corner, exposing only his head and shoulders. It was a difficult shot, with most of his body protected by the building's wall. She aimed for center mass of what she could see, knowing that even a shoulder hit would likely disable him enough to stop the immediate threat. She fired and the gunner spun away from view. Another fighter grabbed the RPG launcher and tried to continue the attack. Emily was ready for him, her crosshairs already positioned where she expected him to appear. When he leaned out to aim, she fired. The RPG launcher fell to the ground, and no one else tried to pick it up. Petty Officer Davis, the team's communications specialist, reported that the extraction helicopters were 10 minutes out. 10 minutes sounded like nothing in normal circumstances, but in combat it felt like an eternity. Marcus knew they couldn't hold their current position much longer. The enemy was learning their defensive patterns and adapting. He made the difficult decision to prepare for movement to the alternative landing zone. They would have to leave the relative safety of the compound and cross open ground while under fire. It was risky, but staying put was becoming equally dangerous. Emily heard the plan over the radio and immediately shifted her focus. Her new mission was to provide covering fire during the team's movement. She studied the route they would take, identifying every window, doorway, and rooftop that could hide an enemy fighter. There were dozens of potential firing positions along the 200-meter path. She couldn't watch them all simultaneously, so she prioritized based on which positions offered the best angles of fire on the SEAL's route. Her mind was working like a tactical computer, calculating sight lines and probable enemy positions. Marcus divided his team into 2 groups. Jake would lead the first group in a sprint to a halfway point, a partially collapsed building that would provide temporary cover. Once they were in position, Marcus would bring the second group, leapfrogging forward in a tactical movement that would hopefully minimize their exposure to enemy fire. It was a classic bounding Overwatch maneuver, but executing it while surrounded by hostiles would be extremely dangerous. Everything depended on Emily's ability to keep enemy heads down during the movement. Jake's team prepared to move. Emily scanned the route one more time, her breathing controlled, her mind focused. Marcus gave the signal, and the first group burst from the compound, running at a full sprint. Enemy fighters immediately appeared in windows and doorways, weapons raised. Emily's rifle spoke with rapid precision. A fighter in a second-story window. Hit. Another on a rooftop. Hit. A third emerging from a doorway. Hit. She was firing faster than she ever had before, trusting her training and instincts to guide each shot. The hot brass casings ejected from her rifle piled up beside her position, glinting in the morning sun. Jake and his team made it to the halfway point, sliding into cover just as bullets began impacting around them. One SEAL had been hit in the leg during the run, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. The team medic immediately began treating him while the others provided security. Now it was Marcus's turn to move with the second group. Emily reloaded her rifle, her hands moving automatically through the motions she had practiced thousands of times. A fresh magazine locked into place and she was ready to cover the next movement. Marcus led his team out of the compound at a dead run. Emily saw a fighter with an AK-47 lean around a corner, tracking the running SEALs with his weapon. She fired and the man jerked backward out of sight. Another enemy appeared on a rooftop and Emily's bullet found him before he could fire a shot. She was operating in a state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow down. Each target presented itself. She assessed and engaged it, and immediately moved to the next threat. There was no conscious thought anymore, just pure reaction honed by training and experience. A bullet struck the rock inches from Emily's face, and sharp stone fragments cut her cheek. Blood trickled down, warm against her skin, but she ignored it. The pain was irrelevant. She identified where the shot had come from and returned fire, silencing that threat. Her rifle's barrel was extremely hot now, the metal actually shimmering with heat. Sustained firing like this could damage the barrel and affect accuracy, but she had no choice. The alternative was watching her teammates die. Marcus's group made it to the collapsed building, reuniting with Jake's team. All the SEALs were now at the halfway point, but they still had another 100 meters to cover to reach the landing zone. Marcus could hear the distant thump of helicopter rotors now, growing steadily louder. The extraction birds were close. He checked his watch. 5 minutes. They just needed to survive 5 more minutes. He looked at the open ground between their position and the landing zone. It was the most dangerous part of the route, with almost no cover. They would be completely exposed for at least 30 seconds during the final sprint. Emily was down to her last magazine. 43 rounds remained. She had brought extra ammunition, but it was stored in a pack that would take precious seconds to access. She decided to use what was immediately available first. 43 rounds to protect 8 men across 100 meters of open ground. She would have to make every single shot count. There could be no misses, no wasted ammunition. She took a moment to drink water from her hydration system, the liquid soothing her dry throat. Then she settled back behind her rifle, ready for the final push. The enemy seemed to sense that the Americans were preparing to leave. They increased their rate of fire, bullets striking all around the collapsed building where the SEALs had taken cover. Jake spotted enemy fighters massing in several buildings that overlooked the final stretch to the landing zone. He reported their positions to Emily, who was already tracking some of them through her scope. She began engaging targets preemptively, eliminating threats before the team even started moving. Each shot was carefully aimed, deliberately placed. A fighter on a balcony, down. Another in a window, down. A third behind a low wall, down. The helicopters appeared over the ridge, 2 Blackhawks flying in low and fast. The pilots could see the battle below and were threading their way through enemy fire to reach the landing zone. Tracer rounds streaked up toward them, but the helicopter door gunners returned fire with their mounted machine guns. The cavalry had arrived, but the most dangerous moment was still ahead. The SEALs would have to cross that final stretch of open ground while enemy fighters tried to cut them down, and while the helicopters attempted to land under fire. Emily's 43 rounds suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for the task ahead. Marcus made eye contact with each of his team members, getting a nod of readiness from each one. The injured SEAL would be supported by 2 others during the run. They couldn't leave anyone behind. That was the code. The unbreakable rule that every special operator lived by. Marcus raised his hand, fingers spread. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Go. The SEALs burst from cover and sprinted toward the landing zone with everything they had. Emily's world contracted to the view through her scope. She saw enemy fighters rising from cover to fire at the running SEALs. Her rifle tracked and fired in one smooth motion. Target down. Next target, fire, down. Another appeared, fire, down. She was burning through her ammunition at a terrifying rate, but there was no other choice. Each shot she took was one less bullet flying at her teammates. Her shoulder throbbed from the constant recoil, and her cheek pressed against the rifle stock was raw from hours of sustained shooting. But these discomforts existed in some distant place that didn't matter. Jake was running hard, his lungs burning from the thin mountain air and the exertion of the sprint while carrying heavy gear. He saw bullets kicking up dust around his feet and heard the distinctive crack of rounds passing close by. Then those shots stopped, and he knew it was because Emily had eliminated whoever was shooting at him. He didn't have breath to spare for words, but he felt overwhelming gratitude for the woman on the ridge who he had initially doubted. She was saving their lives with every trigger pull. The first helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Its door gunners were firing their machine guns, adding their weight of fire to the battle. Emily coordinated her shots to avoid hitting the friendly aircraft, which meant restricting her field of fire even more. An enemy fighter appeared with an RPG, trying to get a shot at the helicopter. Emily saw him and fired in the same instant. The fighter fell, the RPG unfired. If that rocket had hit the helicopter, it could have killed everyone aboard and stranded the SEALs in the landing zone. Marcus and 3 other SEALs reached the first helicopter and practically dove through the open door. The crew chief grabbed them and pulled them deeper into the aircraft to make room for the others. Jake and his group were still 50 meters away, struggling to carry their wounded teammate while under fire. Emily saw an enemy fighter lean out of a window with a machine gun, the weapon's barrel swinging toward Jake's group. She fired. The machine gun clattered to the ground unused. Her ammunition counter showed 23 rounds remaining. The second helicopter landed beside the first, its rotors creating a hurricane of dust that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Jake's team reached the aircraft and began loading the wounded SEAL first, lifting him into the crew chief's waiting hands. Enemy fire intensified, bullets striking the helicopter's armored sides with metallic pings. One round shattered a window, spraying the interior with glass fragments. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, urgent but controlled, saying they needed to leave immediately or risk losing both aircraft. Emily saw movement on a rooftop overlooking the landing zone. 3 fighters were setting up what looked like a heavier machine gun, one that could potentially pierce the helicopter's armor. They were working frantically, knowing they only had seconds before the aircraft lifted off. Emily shifted her aim to them, firing 3 rapid shots. The first 2 found their marks, but the third was a miss, her first clear miss of the entire engagement. She immediately fired again and the third fighter fell. The machine gun toppled from the rooftop, unused. 19 rounds left. Jake threw himself into the second helicopter, and the crew chief gave the pilot the signal that everyone was aboard. The helicopters began to lift off, their turbines screaming as they clawed for altitude. Emily continued to fire, engaging any target that posed a threat to the ascending aircraft. She saw the man with the red headscarf again, this time with a rocket launcher on his shoulder, aiming at the departing helicopters. She didn't hesitate. Her crosshairs settled on his center mass and she fired. The man collapsed, the rocket firing wildly into the air as he fell, exploding harmlessly against a distant hillside. The helicopters climbed rapidly, banking away from the village as their door gunners continued to suppress enemy fire. Emily watched through her scope as her teammates escaped, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. They had made it. Against impossible odds, surrounded and outnumbered, they had survived. She allowed herself one deep breath, then immediately began to think about her own extraction. She was alone on the ridge, still surrounded by hostiles who now knew approximately where she was positioned. Enemy fighters would be climbing the mountain to find her within minutes. Emily quickly packed her rifle and essential gear, abandoning anything that wasn't critical. She had planned an escape route before the mission began, a basic rule of sniper operations. Never occupy a position without knowing how to leave it. She moved away from her shooting position, heading along the ridge toward a ravine that would provide cover during her descent. Behind her, she could hear voices calling out in Pashto, fighters organizing to pursue her. She moved as quickly as the terrain allowed, jumping from rock to rock using every bit of cover available. A radio crackled to life on her vest. Marcus's voice came through, asking for her position. She responded while still moving, giving him her coordinates and direction of travel. Marcus told her that they were already coordinating her extraction. A helicopter would return for her, but she needed to reach a pickup point 3 kilometers away. 3 kilometers of mountain terrain, while being pursued by angry fighters who had just watched their comrades fall to her rifle. Emily rogered the transmission and increased her pace. Shots rang out behind her, bullets striking rocks around her position. The enemy had spotted her movement. Emily dove into the ravine, sliding down a steep slope in a controlled fall that left her scraped and bruised but moving fast. She could hear the pursuers above, their voices excited and aggressive. They wanted revenge for the devastating casualties she had inflicted. Emily reached the bottom of the ravine and began running along its length, using the terrain to mask her movement from the fighters above. Her legs burned with fatigue, and her lungs struggled with the thin air at this altitude. She had been in position for hours, much of that time spent in intense concentration while firing her rifle. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the battle was beginning to fade, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. But she couldn't stop. Stopping meant capture or death. She thought about her teammates safely aboard those helicopters, thought about how she had kept them alive through the worst firefight of her career. That memory gave her the strength to keep moving. Emily emerged from the ravine and found herself on a boulder-strewn slope that descended toward a wider valley. The pickup point was still 2 kilometers away. She could see dust rising in the distance where vehicles were moving. The enemy was trying to cut off her escape route with trucks full of fighters. She had to reach the pickup point before they did. Emily checked her rifle. 14 rounds remained. If it came to a final stand, she would make those bullets count. But first she would run. She would run until she couldn't run anymore, and then she would run some more. Emily ran with a tactical mindset, constantly scanning her surroundings for both threats and opportunities. Every rock could be cover, every ridge could hide an enemy, every shadow could conceal danger. Her training had taught her to never just run blindly, but to move with purpose and awareness. She spotted a cluster of large boulders ahead and altered her course toward them, knowing she might need a defensive position soon. The sound of engines grew louder, and she could now see 3 pickup trucks racing across the valley floor, trying to intercept her path to the extraction point. Marcus was in the lead helicopter, arguing with the pilot about going back for Emily immediately. The pilot explained that they needed to refuel and rearm first, that going back now with depleted ammunition and fuel would risk everyone's lives. Marcus understood the logic but hated it. Emily had saved his entire team and now she was alone in hostile territory. Jake sat beside him, checking and rechecking his weapons, preparing to go back in with Marcus the moment they could. The other SEALs were doing the same, their earlier doubts about Emily completely erased. She was one of them now, proven in the only way that mattered in their world. Emily reached the boulder cluster and took a moment to catch her breath and assess her situation. She was approximately 1.5 kilometers from the pickup point, but the enemy vehicles would reach that location before she could. She needed to slow them down or find an alternate route. Through her rifle scope, she studied the lead vehicle. It was packed with fighters, all armed and clearly eager to find her. The smart tactical decision would be to avoid engagement and try to evade. But Emily realized that if these trucks reached the pickup point first, they could set up an ambush that would make extraction impossible. She made her decision in seconds. Emily set up behind the largest boulder, using it to stabilize her rifle. The range to the lead vehicle was approximately 800 meters and growing shorter as it approached. She aimed not at the fighters but at the driver. Without a driver, the vehicle would crash and block the rough trail, hopefully stopping or at least delaying the other trucks. She controlled her breathing, made her calculations for distance and movement, and fired. The windshield of the lead truck spiderwebbed, and the vehicle swerved violently before rolling over in a cloud of dust. The second truck had to brake hard to avoid hitting it, and the third truck stopped as well. Fighters poured out of the vehicles, taking cover and searching for who had shot at them. Emily didn't wait to see more. She moved immediately, knowing that staying in one place after firing was a death sentence for a sniper. She ran parallel to the valley, using the terrain to stay out of sight. The enemy fighters were now on foot, which meant she had evened the odds slightly. On foot, she could take routes that vehicles couldn't follow. The downside was that her extraction helicopter couldn't land in the rough terrain she was entering either. She would have to find a way back to the original pickup point or identify a new one. The radio crackled again. A new voice, calm and professional, identified himself as Gunslinger 26, the pilot of her extraction helicopter. He was 20 minutes out from her position and needed her to mark a landing zone. Emily's mind raced through her options. The original pickup point was compromised. She needed flat ground, big enough for a helicopter to land and defensible enough that she could hold it until extraction arrived. She scanned the terrain ahead and spotted a small plateau about half a kilometer away. It wasn't ideal, but it might work. Emily gave the coordinates to Gunslinger 26 and told him the situation with the enemy fighters. The pilot acknowledged and told her that her SEAL team was aboard his aircraft, armed and ready to provide support during pickup. Marcus's voice came on the channel, asking if she was injured. Emily reported that she was mobile and combat effective, using the technical language that conveyed information without emotion. Marcus told her they were coming for her and to hold on. His voice carried a note of fierce determination that gave Emily a surge of renewed energy. The enemy fighters were spreading out, trying to flank her position. Emily counted at least 12 visible hostiles, with probably more that she couldn't see. She had 12 rounds of ammunition left, a poetic symmetry she might have appreciated under different circumstances. She kept moving toward the plateau, using every scrap of cover available. A fighter appeared ahead of her, suddenly close, his AK-47 swinging toward her. Emily reacted on pure instinct, firing from the hip, a snapshot that was more luck than skill. The fighter fell and Emily kept running. 11 rounds left. She reached the plateau and immediately set up a hasty defensive position behind a fallen tree that must have been carried down the mountain by some ancient flood. The plateau was about 50 meters across, plenty of room for a helicopter. Now she just had to hold it for 15 minutes. Emily checked her gear. She had 3 grenades left, her sidearm with 2 magazines and her rifle with 11 rounds. She also had a knife, but she hoped it wouldn't come to that. The enemy fighters were closing in, moving carefully now, aware that she was dangerous. Emily picked her targets carefully. A fighter who exposed himself while moving between rocks. She fired, down, 10 rounds. Another who paused too long while scanning for her position. Fire, down, 9 rounds. She was making them pay for every meter they advanced. But they were learning to move more cautiously, using cover more effectively. These weren't untrained militia. They were experienced fighters who understood small unit tactics. That made them more dangerous, but also more predictable in some ways. Emily anticipated their movements, positioning herself to cover the most likely approach routes. A group of 3 fighters tried to rush her position simultaneously from different angles. Emily engaged the closest one first, down, 8 rounds. The second one dove into cover, but she had marked his position. When he leaned out to return fire, she was ready. Down, 7 rounds. The third fighter wisely retreated out of her line of sight. Emily used the momentary lull to change positions, moving 20 meters to her left. Snipers who stayed in one place died quickly once their position was known. Movement, even small movements, created uncertainty in the enemy's mind. The sound of helicopter rotors reached her ears, distant, but growing closer. The extraction bird was approaching. The enemy fighters heard it too and increased their efforts to reach Emily's position before the helicopter arrived. A hail of bullets struck the area around her, forcing her to keep her head down. She couldn't return fire without exposing herself to multiple shooters. This was the dangerous moment she had feared, when suppressive fire could pin her down while other enemies closed in for the kill. Emily pulled out one of her grenades, judged the distance to where the heaviest fire was coming from, and threw it with all her strength. The grenade arced through the air and exploded among a group of rocks where several fighters had taken cover. The firing from that direction stopped. She used the confusion to pop up and engage targets that had exposed themselves during the grenade blast. 2 quick shots, 2 down. 5 rounds remaining. The helicopter was very close now, perhaps only a minute away. A fighter appeared at the edge of the plateau, closer than Emily had expected. He had flanked her position while she was focused on the other threats. His rifle was already aimed at her. Time seemed to slow as Emily saw his finger tightening on the trigger. She was bringing her own weapon around, knowing she would be too late. Then the fighter's chest exploded in a spray of red as heavy caliber rounds from the helicopter's door gun found him. The Black Hawk swept over the plateau, its door gunners raking the surrounding area with devastating fire. The helicopter flared and touched down on the plateau in a controlled crash of machinery and dust. The door was already open, and Emily could see Marcus reaching out toward her, his hand extended. She sprinted the final meters, bullets striking the ground around her feet as enemy fighters made one last desperate attempt to stop her escape. Jake and 2 other SEALs were providing covering fire from the helicopter, their weapons hammering away at any target they could see. Emily grabbed Marcus's hand and he hauled her into the aircraft with strength born of desperation and relief. The helicopter lifted off immediately, its engine screaming with the strain of a maximum performance takeoff. Emily collapsed onto the floor of the aircraft, her body finally giving in to exhaustion now that she was safe. The door gunners continued firing as the helicopter climbed and banked away from the plateau. She could hear the SEALs around her, their voices congratulating her, thanking her, celebrating her survival. Someone pressed a water bottle into her hands. Someone else was checking her for injuries, treating the cuts on her face from the stone fragments. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. Marcus knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder.
He told her that what she had done today would be talked about for years to come in the special operations community.
She had single-handedly held off a force that outnumbered them 10-1, had provided covering fire that saved 8 lives, and had then fought her way through enemy territory to safety. Jake added that her final count was 43 confirmed enemy kills, a number that was almost unbelievable for a single engagement. Emily just nodded, too tired for words. The numbers didn't matter to her. What mattered was that her teammates were alive. The helicopter climbed higher, leaving the violent valley behind. Through the open door, Emily could see the village growing smaller, the smoke from various fires drifting in the morning breeze. It looked almost peaceful from this altitude. No sign of the desperate battle that had raged there. She thought about the men she had killed, enemy fighters who had families and lives that were now ended. She didn't feel joy at their deaths, but she felt no guilt either. They had tried to kill her teammates and she had stopped them. That was the job she had signed up for, the oath she had taken. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Emily dozed fitfully, her body trying to recover from the physical and mental strain of the past hours. When she woke, Jake was sitting across from her, cleaning his weapon with the methodical care that all soldiers showed their tools. He looked up and gave her a slight smile, then went back to his work. No more words were needed. They had gone through something together that created a bond stronger than anything words could express. She was no longer the new attachment to the team. She was a proven warrior, a trusted teammate, a sister in arms. The base appeared ahead, a collection of buildings and fortifications carved out of the hostile landscape. The helicopter landed on the helipad and medical personnel rushed forward. They insisted on checking Emily thoroughly despite her protests that she was fine. A few cuts, some bruises, and extreme fatigue were the extent of her injuries. She had been incredibly lucky. The medics cleared her, and she walked with her team to the debriefing area, limping slightly from muscles that had been pushed beyond their normal limits. The debriefing lasted for hours. Intelligence officers wanted to know every detail of the engagement, every enemy position, every weapon system she had observed. Emily answered their questions as accurately as she could, though parts of the battle had blurred together in her memory. When she described the moment she had engaged the RPG gunner to protect the helicopters, the intelligence officer paused his note-taking and just looked at her for a moment before asking her to continue. She realized that these officers, who dealt with combat reports every day, were still amazed by what had happened on that mountainside. Marcus filed his after-action report, and his description of Emily's actions was glowing. He recommended her for commendation, noting that her precision fire and tactical judgment had been the deciding factors in the team's survival. Every member of the SEAL team added their own statements, each one praising her skill and bravery. The paperwork would take weeks to process through the military bureaucracy, but everyone involved knew that what Emily had done was extraordinary. That evening, Emily sat alone in her quarters, finally processing everything that had happened. She field-stripped and cleaned her rifle, finding the familiar routine soothing after the chaos of combat. The barrel showed signs of the intense heat and sustained firing, and she made a note to have the armorer check it thoroughly. Her rifle had performed flawlessly when everything depended on it, and she owed it proper care. As she worked, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. From that first hunting trip with her grandfather to this deployment in a war zone halfway around the world. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat down and handed her one, and they drank in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then he told her that the mission's high-value target had been killed in the fighting, caught in the crossfire during the battle. The intelligence that had brought them to that village had been partially correct, just incomplete about the level of defensive preparation. Marcus said that despite the ambush and the desperate fighting, the mission would be counted as a success. The target was eliminated and everyone had come home alive. That was as good as it got in their world. Marcus also told her that he had been wrong about her. He had harbored doubts, not about her qualifications or training, but about how she would perform when bullets started flying and lives were on the line. Those doubts had been completely erased. He told her that if she was willing, he wanted her as the permanent sniper attachment for his team. Emily didn't hesitate. She accepted. These men were her brothers now, and she would stand with them in whatever battles lay ahead. The weeks following the mission brought a mixture of routine and recognition. Emily received the Silver Star for gallantry in action, one of the military's highest decorations. The ceremony was small and quiet, attended only by her immediate team and a few senior officers. The larger special operations community heard about the engagement through the informal networks that existed between units. Other female soldiers began to seek her out, wanting to know her story, inspired by what she had accomplished. Emily tried to downplay the attention, but she understood its importance. She had kicked down a door that others could now walk through more easily. Training resumed, preparing for the next mission and the one after that. Emily worked with her SEAL team, learning their tactics and procedures while teaching them the finer points of long-range precision fire. The mutual respect that had been forged in combat deepened with familiarity. They learned each other's habits, strengths, and weaknesses. They became not just a team, but a family, bound together by shared danger and shared purpose. Jake taught her some of the team's traditions and inside jokes. Thompson showed her techniques for reading terrain and wind that he had learned over 20 years of combat deployments. Emily wrote letters home to her family, carefully vague about her activities but trying to convey that she was well and doing meaningful work. Her father wrote back, his pride evident even in his sparse military-style prose. Her grandfather sent a short note saying he always knew she was a natural shooter and that he wished he could see her in action. Emily smiled at that, imagining her grandfather's reaction if he knew exactly what kind of shooting she had been doing. Months passed, and then more missions came. Some were relatively quiet reconnaissance operations. Others were high-intensity raids similar to the one where Emily had proven herself. She continued to perform with the same precision and calm judgment that had saved lives on that Afghan mountainside. Her kill count grew, but she never kept track of the numbers. Some snipers marked their kills on their rifles or talked about their tallies. Emily never did. Each shot had been necessary. Each target had been a threat to her teammates or innocent people, but she took no joy in the killing itself. It was a grim duty, executed with professional skill but without celebration. The war eventually wound down and Emily's deployment came to an end. She returned to the United States to ceremonies and debriefings and the strange adjustment of being back in a place where people weren't trying to kill her. The transition was difficult, as it was for most combat veterans. The intensity of deployment, the clarity of purpose, the deep bonds with teammates, all of these were hard to replace in civilian life or even in garrison military life. Emily stayed in touch with Marcus and the other SEALs, occasional messages and rare phone calls that maintained the connection forged in fire. Years later, Emily would sometimes think about that day on the mountainside, about the decisions she had made and the lives she had saved. She had been tested in the most extreme way possible and had not been found wanting. The doubts she had faced throughout her career, the questions about whether a woman could perform at the highest levels, that can,